Hello everyone, welcome back to Jessie Kate Creates. It's Jessica, and today we are going to be making a classy black and gold sympathy card. So to jump right in, I have a piece of Canson XL watercolor paper that is 3 1/4 by 4 1/2. You could use regular cardstock, I just like the texture of this paper. And for my main image on my stamp, I'm using this Sending Floral Wishes stamp set from Spellbinders. It's no longer available. It was part of their club kit a few years ago, but I did see that Spellbinders is having a huge buy one get one free sale right now. I'll have the link to that in the description box below, but if you have something in your Spellbinders cart, now is the time to check and see if it's part of that sale. So for the sentiment on my card, I am using the Stampin' Up! Rose Wonder stamp set. This is also a retired stamp set, but it's one that I really love. I picked it up at a thrift store and I find myself using it all the time. So for this card, use whatever it is you have in your stash. You could easily change out the sentiment to make this a birthday card or a thinking of you card or whatever it is that you need. And I'm sure you have some sort of floral design in your stash, so you definitely don't have to use the supplies I'm using here. Okay, so I've pulled out that floral spray image and I'm trying to decide how I want it positioned on my card. I want the edges to overhang the panel. That's one of the reasons I positioned things in the middle of my MISTI so that there'd be enough room for the stamp to hang off. And I know I want the image to stretch from the top left corner to the bottom right, and the stamp's not quite big enough for that. So at first I thought I might just use one of the additional images in the stamp set to fill it in, but later I changed my mind and I decided I didn't like that as much. So here I'm going to stamp down with some Versamark sticky ink because I am going to be doing heat embossing. That's also why I decided to treat my panel with some anti-static powder. Now I am making sure to stamp my image 2 times because I'm using a textured paper. You could of course use cardstock here. You don't have to use watercolor since we're not coloring anything in. I just like the texture, but because of that I did need to stamp it twice to get a good image. Once I had it stamped down, I added some gold embossing powder, and here I'm just using my heat tool to melt that, and you can see we have this beautiful gold floral spray. Now to fill in some of the gaps, I'm just going to use this stamp set again and position it a little bit differently. So I made sure to clean it off really well so that there wasn't any of that sticky ink on my stamp. Otherwise it would transfer all over the paper and it would make it really hard to get a good crisp impression. So just make sure you clean your stamp really well if you are going to use it repeatedly like I am here. Once I found a positioning that I like, I go ahead and ink up my stamp. And again, stamping it twice since we are working with a textured paper. And then I'll just do the same process of adding my embossing powder, cleaning up any stray bits of powder with a dry paintbrush, and then heating up that image with my heat tool. And now we're going to go through that exact same process one more time because I want to fill in that tiny gap at the bottom. Now, of course, you could use a bigger floral image, or you could just, if you have supporting images in your stamp set, you could go ahead and use those. I just didn't like the sizing of that really small flower, so I decided not to do it, and I liked the way that this looked better. So now that I have everything heat embossed and I have that big floral spray all across the card, it's time to add the sentiment. So I'm using this You're in My Thoughts and Prayers. I thought that was really nice and I like the font on this. And I'm just kind of trying to position it in that upper corner so that it's an equal distance from the top and from the right hand side. Once I get it where I like it, I pick it up with my MISTI and I'm going to be stamping with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. It just gives a really nice crisp impression, especially for detailed images and sentiments. Now you'll see here why the MISTI was important for this. I did not get a great impression that first time, and that's just because, again, I'm stamping on a very textured paper. So I go ahead and stamp that down 3 times, and I really like the way that sentiment came out. But I did decide I wanted to add some extra interest to the panel, so I'm going to add a little bit of black splatter. To do that, I have this black acrylic paint from Folk Art in the color Licorice. It's just a nice dark black ink. And I'm going to add a couple drops of water. It's just a water dropper bottle I keep on my desk. And I'm going to mix that up so that my paint is nice and loose and liquidy, so that it's, I can splatter it onto the card. Now I keep a shoebox in my craft room that I use just for splattering. So I've added my panel in there, and I am just going to lightly tap on the paintbrush to get those black splatters on the card. Now, in hindsight, I think I probably should have gotten a scrap of paper and covered up my sentiment. I didn't do that, but it ended up working out pretty okay. So here, just add as much splatter as you like. Usually I like a lot of splatter, but I wanted to keep it kind of simple here. So I didn't put as much as I normally would, but it's just up to you how much you do or don't want to add. Now at this point I noticed there was a black mark right in the middle of the N that was kind of making it a little difficult to read. So while the paint is still wet, I'm just grabbing a paper towel and kind of blotting that up. It doesn't get rid of it completely, but in person it does make it much more legible. I know on camera it's still kind of hard to read, but it was much more legible in person. So now I'm going to go ahead and set this aside and let it dry. And while that's drying, we are going to work on the inside sentiment for our card. So here I have a panel of cardstock that measures 4 by 5 1/4. And I'm just going to pop that in my MISTI, and I am using the scrapbook.com In Our Hearts Forever stamp set. I really love all of these phrases for the inside of Sympathy cards, and you can see this is a very well-loved and well-used stamp set for me. So I just picked the stamp that says, the moments we treasure with those we love remain in our hearts forever. I just think that one is so sweet and so perfect for Sympathy cards. And I am just using the same black ink that I used on the front of the card to stamp this down. I'm happy I used my MISTI here because I did need to stamp it 2 or 3 times to get a good impression. I'm not pressing down very hard because I don't want to blow out those lines. I want to keep them nice and fine, which is why I needed to stamp it multiple times. Now I decided here is where I would use that small flower from the original stamp set, and I'm just positioning it in the bottom corner of this panel. And I'm using this Concord and Ninth Stardust ink. I love this for cards where I have used gold embossing because this is a nice gold color, but I don't have to actually do heat embossing on the inside of my card. So once that panel was done, I decide while I have my stamps out, we're going to go ahead and make a coordinating envelope. So I just have it positioned in my MISTI, and I'm taking the same large floral image that we used on the front of the card, and I'm adding it to the bottom corner of the envelope. And there I was just making sure that the envelope was in my MISTI in the correct orientation. I'm using that same Stardust ink on the envelope, so we have a pretty gold matching envelope. So now it is time to assemble this card. I've cut out some matting layers here. I have a gold layer that is 3 3/8 by 4 5/8, and I have a vellum layer that is 3 1/2 by 4 3/4. And that's just going to give us a really nice gold and vellum frame that's going to be nice and dainty around the edge of the card. You could do larger borders if you'd like, but I like the look of those thin ones. Now here, I do not do a good job of aligning these. I tried to remove that vellum carefully, but it creased, so I had to cut a new panel, which is fine because at the end of the day, all of this is just paper. So I go ahead and cut out that second panel, and I do a much better job of aligning those two. And then it's time to add our watercolor piece on top. Now for a little bit extra interest on the card, I am going to pop this panel up on some foam tape. I love a little bit of dimension on my cards, especially the more simple ones. It just adds so much interest to the cards. So I get that on the back, and then everything is ready to be assembled. So for this card, I'm using a black side folding A2 card base, and I'm going to start by adding my inner panel on the inside of the card. And once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and pop up that main panel on the front of the card. I'm adding some wet glue onto my foam tape so that I have a little bit of extra wiggle room, which I definitely needed when I was adhering my panel down. And I just hold my card right up in front of my face to make sure everything is straight. And then I brought it back into frame and pressed everything down. Now my card base kept popping open, so I did add a piece of removable tape on the inside just to make it easier when I was adding the panel to the front of the card. So that completes our card. I love the way this looks with the simple frame, the gold embossing. We have our sentiment on the inside, and we even have a matching envelope. So I hope this inspires you to get creative. If you liked this video, press like and be sure to subscribe for all my future videos. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!